Hey, would you turn in your Bibles to Nehemiah chapter 3. Nehemiah is in the Old Testament. If you open right in the middle, you'll come to the book of Psalms, and then go toward the front just a little bit, and you will come to the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah gives us a little bit of the history of Israel, and it's a great teaching about what we can do together. And we have kind of the theme of the month, we can do more together. And we've talked about throughout the month that two people working together can accomplish more than two people working separately. So I have a little once upon a time here to get the message rolling. So once upon a time, 3 colleagues worked at an office. Their names were somebody, everybody, and nobody. Everybody loved to work. Somebody was always able to say the right thing to management, and nobody had a tendency to be negative. The bosses at corporate said that everybody was experienced and capable. Everybody would be responsible for solving problems as they came up. Everybody was happy to be trusted. Somebody said that this was a great example of employee empowerment. Nobody thought that it might be a great opportunity for somebody to dodge work again. One day there was a crisis. Everybody said that somebody needed to fix the problem. Somebody said that they were always doing the hard jobs and it wasn't their turn. Nobody was listening. And nobody saw that the problem wasn't really going to be fixed. Everybody continued to complain about the problem. And in reality, everybody was a bit nervous when solving problems and afraid of looking stupid anyway. Somebody was a lot better qualified than they were to fix that problem. And so nobody looked at the situation and to resolve it. Now the bosses weren't happy because everybody was responsible, but nobody had done the work. The bosses wanted to make an example, but they couldn't sack everybody. So somebody got fired, even though it wasn't really their fault, and nobody got a bonus that year. It's called the bystander effect. The bystander effect is when a situation arises and somebody needs to act and people watch what's happening. They kind of sit back. The bystander effect. Now, families can be plagued by the bystander effect when issues need to be addressed, but nobody's willing to deal with it. So the rug gets lumpy because things get swept under the rug and it's a lumpy rug, but the bystander effect's in place. Nobody's doing anything about it. Bickering children or peeling paint or runaway debt. Somebody needs to do something about that. Government entities can be plagued by the bystander effect. Budget constraints or re-election concerns serve as excuses for not addressing real issues. In fact, there's a phrase that's used when it comes to politics, kicking the can down the road. They don't ever deal with it. They just kick it down the road so that a generation from now, a year from now, a decade from now, somebody else has to worry about it. Churches easily can develop the bystander effect as well. They can rail against Hollywood and rail against the sinners and rail against any other easy target without getting their hands dirty. Somebody needs to do something about that. It doesn't take long around here to realize that FBC is doing what we can to fight the bystander effect. It's what we're talking about 2 weeks from now, getting our hands dirty for God. We're not going to sit around and complain about things. We're going to do something about fixing what we see going on around us. We're going to look at our world and see some of the brokenness, and we can't fix everything, but we're going to do something about something. So that's our theme. We can do more together. Nehemiah is a great example of that. And we come to Nehemiah chapter 3 in our study. And it addresses the bystander effect. And it's a fascinating chapter because if at first glance, if we were to read through the book, the chapter, what we would see is just a bunch of names doing work. and so, names we can't even pronounce hardly. In fact, just so you know, I have no idea how to pronounce most of these, but I'm going to say them with great confidence. And so you'll be like, wow, I guess that's how you say it. He went to college for that. No, I have no idea. I'm just going to say it with confidence, okay? So it's going to teach us here, how do we fight the bystander effect? And rather than read a lengthy portion, we're going to find bits and pieces. Because if you glance at chapter 3 of Nehemiah, you're going to see just a lot of big names and awkward people's names. And so we're going to just break it down into 4 parts to try to understand it. The first is to lead by example. If we're going to fight the bystander effect, then we've got to do it. Lead by example, not wait for the proverbial somebody else to do that. So take a look at verse 1. Then Eliashib, the high priest, rose up with his brethren the priests, and they built the sheep gate. They consecrated it and hung its doors. They built as far as the Tower of the 100, and consecrated it then as far as the Tower of Hananel. Then next to Eliashib, the men of Jericho built, and next to them Zaccur, the son of Imri, built. Also the sons of Hassanah built the fish gate. They laid its beams and hung its doors with its bolts and bars. So there's all these different people, and the whole chapter just goes on. This person did their job, this person did their job, this person did their job. And they led by example. So in verse 1, who's leading by example here? The priests. The high priest, the main priest, the lead priest, Eliashib. And he's got all his priests together, and they're leading by example. Now these were the paid religious professionals. What would they have known about wall building construction? Not very much. They just knew it needed to be done. And there's a lot of people in here that aren't experts at what they're doing, but are doing it anyway. Now, look at what part of the wall, because they're rebuilding the wall around Jerusalem. Look what part of the wall the priests are rebuilding. You see it there? What's it say? The sheep gate. Now, why would the priests be interested in the sheep gate? What would priests and sheep have? Anything in common? Absolutely. Sacrifices and all of that. So the priests were very concerned with the area of sacrifices so that they could reconstitute the sacrificial system going on there. And so the sheep gate, that's where they brought the sheep through. It wasn't even necessarily as tall as a man. They'd run the sheep through there and on their way to a sacrifice. Look at verse 9. Here's a couple more names. And next to them, Raphiah, the son of Hur, leader of half the district of Jerusalem, made repairs. So like the city councilman is out there leading the way in his section of the wall, verse 12. And next to him was Shallum, the son of I'm not sounding confident on that one. Halahesh, leader of half the district of Jerusalem. He and his daughters made repairs. So there's the other city council member. In verse 14, there's another leader, Malchijah, the son of Rechab, leader of the district of Beth Hesserim. He repaired the refuge gate. So there's all these different leaders leading by example. Now look closely at verse 14 again. The leader, Malchijah there, leader of the refuse gate. We're going to come back to that, but you just hang on to that note. In this chapter, there's 10 different leaders that are mentioned by name that are serving in the wall building project. Leadership is taking the first step or initiative. If you're jotting anything down, we use this definition of leadership a lot around here. In fact, one of our Bible Hour classes beginning in September is going to be on leadership. Taking the first step, initiative. It's how you fight the bystander effect. Somebody's got to take the first step. And then secondly, take someone with you. That's influence. If you go by yourself, you're on a nice journey, but you're not a leader. A leader is going to take somebody with them in the journey because it's more fun. You get to see it reproduced in that individual. There's a lot of reasons why you'd want to take somebody with you. Two are going to accomplish more than one. Nothing more frustrating. Maybe you've worked in an environment. There's nothing more frustrating than having a leader make rules for everybody else and he doesn't follow them. They tell everybody this is the way it is, and then she doesn't follow the rules herself. They don't lead by example, and the rest of the crew is like, hey, maybe a little bit of example around here would maybe help us all out if somebody would lead by example. Many are frustrated by some issue, an alternate. Maybe you're frustrated by an issue and you're trying to get other people fired up. Come on, we've got to do something about this. And they kind of have a right to ask, what have you been doing about it up until now? What have you done about it so far? Have you done anything about it? Well, no, I haven't. I was hoping I'd get a bunch of people and we'd go, well, no, I mean, what have you... Like one of the Faith in Action projects, the first one that was on the list, was brought to my attention last month. And the individual that brought it to my attention said, I've been mowing this person's grass and I've been doing other things around their house. But if we had a team of people, we could really bless this individual. Well, that's fun to get on board with that because they've already been doing it. They've been leading by example. And that's the case there. Now, parents, again, if you have sensed that your child has got an entitlement mentality, they don't seem to appreciate what they have. They seem to feel like they're the center of the world. One of the things that often is done is we just complain about kids these days. Just how kids are. How much better would it be if your kids grew up watching you serve and then joining you in serving other people? Finding your place along the wall and working together with you. Come on, let's get in together. This is what we do as a family. Join with you in working together. Now, every job is important. Not only lead by example, but we're going to recognize, if we're going to fight the bystander effect, is we've got to recognize that every job is important. There's a phrase in this chapter, next to them, like in verse 2, it says, next to Eliashib, the men of Jericho built, and next to them Zakur, the son of Imri, built. Over and over in this chapter, it says this person and team worked, then this team worked, and this team worked, and this team worked. So I was thinking about, like down in verse 10, it says that. Next to them, Jediah, the son of Haramath, made repairs in front of his house. And next to him, Hattush, the son of Hashanab, made repairs. So imagine if one of the people made the repairs in front of his house, but the guy next to him was having the bystander effect, looking and saying, somebody should do something about this portion of the wall. No matter how strong this guy built this part of the wall, it's still vulnerable if this part isn't built. Every role was important. Every person had a contribution to make. I like in verse 2 where it says, Zakur, the son of Imri, built. Because Zakur is not ever mentioned in the Bible again. He gets one mention, but it's in the Bible. And it's for building something. It's for doing something. Might seem like a small contribution. He just built the wall. We hardly know anything about him. We don't know the name of his wife and kids and his career, how many boats he had. We don't know about his campers and tents and how many ball teams his kids were on. We just know he built right there. That's all we know. And it's in the Bible. There's 38 people mentioned by name. And there's 42 groups of people that are mentioned. Now, some jobs are less desirable, but just as important. They still need done. Remember back in verse 14, it says that Malchijah, the son of Rechab, leader of the district of Beth Hasarem, repaired the refuse gate. Now, some of you in your translations, it doesn't say refuse gate, it says dung gate. What do you think happens at the dung gate? Another translation called it the sewer gate. What do you think happens there? I see, and a leader did that. Some leader said, give me the toughest job you got. The dirtiest, stinkiest, smelliest job, and I'll do that. Now, I think this dirty, smelliest job was the worst one at the wall. But I think there was competition for second place. And here's my nominees. You can decide. The sheep gate might have smelled like the county fair. Might have smelled some, areas of the fair. Or verse 3 mentions the fish gate. What do you think the fish gate smelled like? How many would have rather worked at the sheep gate than the fish gate? How many would rather work at the fish gate rather than the sheep gate? We'll find out what you like to do in your spare time. Mike Rowe has made quite a name for himself with the show Dirty Jobs. I don't know if you ever seen that or heard about that. He goes into different places: coffee grower, coal miner, hot tar roofer, hoof groomer. Tough jobs. Terry's brother came down to visit her folks yesterday, and he has an interesting job. He works in the wastewater department at a hog processing plant. Now he's in charge of it. He has an office, but how'd you like to be working in the wastewater department of a hog processing plant? How many want that job? How much would they have to pay you to do that job? Now, I, for one, am thrilled that he has that job, because every year at the Christmas get-together, he brings pepper bacon that they make in the plant there. And so you've had bacon, but pepper bacon is really good. And so I always think whatever you do all year, it's worth it, because you're bringing pepper bacon. Somebody's got to do the job. And if you'd had that pepper bacon, you'd be like, thank you, man. Go to work Monday again. So not every job's desirable, but every job needs done. I remember years ago, I was a youth pastor, and I was directing the Bible school that we had at our church. And a young lady came and she said, hey, where do you need help today? And I said, man, right, the nursery, we're shorthanded in there. So they went in the nursery, and at the end of the day, it must have been Monday, because they said, hey, if you need help the rest of the week, I'm willing to help. But if you need help in the nursery, I'm not available. Do you know we have everything else covered? I said, but the nursery. Oh, I'm not available the rest of the week. Verse 5 is an interesting one. Look there. Next to them, the Tekoites made repairs. Because again, the whole chapter is full of next to them, next to them, next to them. The Tekoites made repairs. But look at this phrase. But their nobles did not put their shoulders to the work of the Lord. Somebody thinks they're too good for the dirty work. Somebody thinks they're a little more uppity than the rest of the people. They're too good for that. God notes, it's fascinating, that in the Bible, God notes those that aren't working. It's beneath them. I'm too important. It was a few weeks ago, a couple months ago now, I guess, that we talked about the fact that Christianity is from Nazareth and not Jerusalem. And here's what we meant by that. When Jesus was introduced to a man named Nathanael in John chapter 1, Nathanael replied, can any good thing come out of Nazareth? It's where Jesus was raised. And Nazareth was like a backwater town. It's where the rednecks lived. The Hicks lived in Nazareth. The sophisticates all lived in Jerusalem. And Nathanael was like, hey, I'm not sure I can get on board with anybody from Nazareth. they're kind of the bumpkins are in Nazareth. I prefer to hang out with and follow the sophisticated ones who are from Jerusalem. I think these nobles here, they were too sophisticated for the work. When somebody chooses to follow Christ, they're going to be in an environment, we're going to be in our culture where those who follow Christ aren't considered sophisticated. They're not scientific. They're not worldly wise. And those that follow Christ have to come to terms with the fact that the world will look at them as if they're from Nazareth and not Jerusalem. And these guys wanted something more dignified to do. Now, for parents, it's flattering. There's something flattering about when your child is cool or popular. I mean, nobody wants their child to be isolated and friendless. But when it becomes a goal of yours for your child to be popular or cool, a lot of times what's sacrificed is their connection to Christ, because it will always be a narrow road. Jesus used the imagery of a narrow road and a wide road. And he said the wide road's where everybody's going to destruction. The narrow road, the one hardly anybody's on, is the road, the path to God. And so here's what happens when the school year gets rolling. The young person says to their parents, "None of my friends go to youth group." Now, what they mean by that is none of the cool people go. And that if I go there, I'll not look cool. If I go there and hang around, I'll look like I'm from Nazareth and not Jerusalem. And then what happens far too often is the parents are like, "Oh, yeah, you know, you need friends and the right kind of friends." And parents buy into that. And they excuse that and let them off the hook. And then the student's like, "Hey, I'm off the hook. I don't have to think about it. I just can toy around with my Christian faith because it's not a big deal at our house." So I have a suggestion for you parents. Your child comes and says, "Hey, none of my friends go there," meaning none of the cool people that I want to be seen with go there. I would probably say something like, "So?" Make a new friend. Invite your friends to come. Your spiritual growth is a far bigger value and priority in this household than whether you fit in or not at school. You will always be from Nazareth if you walk with God. You will never be among the coolest. You will never be among the elite. You will never be among the sophisticated. You will never be among the most popular. And after 2 weeks ago was 34 years in ministry for Terry and I, 2 Sundays ago. And after observing it for that many years, I have seen it over and over and over. A kid gets too cool for Sunday school, and he thinks, "None of my cool friends are there. I'm going to go. I got all these other friends." And the parents buy it. They believe it. They fall for it. And parents, I would just encourage you not to fall. So what? You're going to make some new friends. And I've said before here, when I was the only one from my high school that went to my church and youth ministry for a long time. We drove 25 minutes to get there. And my mom was like, "You can't sit here with me. You cannot sit with me at church. You got to go make a friend." And, well, we made some. So, those nobles didn't do the work. Nehemiah had a choice. He could sit around and complain and whine and feel sorry for himself that there was a group of people that weren't going to work. Or he could move with the movers. And that's what he did, because person after person after person did the work, and he didn't dwell on the ones that weren't. Now, some people get more work done than others. Take a look at 3:13. Hanan and the inhabitants of Zanoah repaired the valley gate. They built it and hung its doors with its bolts and bars, and they repaired 1,000 cubits of the wall as far as the refuge gate. 1,000 cubits, that's 1,500 feet. How many football fields lengths is that? That's a third of a mile. They did an entire gate area and 1/3 of a mile. And did you notice they got as far as that sewer gate and then they were like, hey, you can take it from here. But they did work 1/3 of a mile plus the gate. Some people have that kind of capacity and some people have less. Jesus talked about different levels of capacity when he gave the parable of the soils. The seed gets sown, and sometimes it's rocky soil and nothing grows, and sometimes the hot sun chokes it out. But he said some seed falls on good ground, and it produces good produce, some 100-fold, some 60, and some 30. It's in Matthew chapter 13 is where that's at, verse 23. He says there's these 3 levels of productivity, and he affirms all 3 levels. He doesn't say, well, that 100 guy, that's who I'm looking for, and shame on the 30. He says there's these levels of productivity, levels of capacity, levels of stewardship that I will be giving people. Several chapters later in Matthew, he gave another parable where it was called the talents, and we use that word now to talk about talents. And it says in Matthew 25 and verse 14, the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country, called his servants all together and delivered his goods. And to one man he gave 5 talents, and to another man he gave 2 talents. To another man he gave 1 talent. And then he left. And it says he gave them according to their ability, these different capacities. And then he left. And then he came back several verses later, verse 20. He who had received 5 talents responded back, look, I have gained 5 more for you, Lord. And the boss, the owner said to him in verse 21, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a few things. I'll make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of the Lord. And then the 2 guy comes back and he says, here's the 2 you gave me, and I made 2 more besides. So then we go to the next verse, verse 23. And he says to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a few things. I'll make you ruler over many. Enter into the joy of your salvation, the joy of the Lord. The 5 guy and the 2 guy got equal commendation. How often some of us 2s have sat around and said, you know, if I was a 5, I'd get involved. I'd do something if I was a 5 guy. Well, we'd go to buy a cheeseburger probably if we were 5 guys. But if I was a 5 talent person, I would do that. But I'm just a 2 or I'm just a 1 and I don't have it in me. And God didn't give me the goods and the resources and the strength or the stamina or the singing ability or this ability or the mechanical ability. Or if he would give me that, then I would. Some people do more work than others, but everyone who was working had the same commendation. Way to go. Well done, good and faithful servant. A couple of verses to show you some interesting things. Verse 8. Next to him, Uzziel, the son of Harhaiah, one of the goldsmiths, made repairs. And next to him, Hananiah, one of the perfumers, made repairs. So what do you think the goldsmiths know about building rock walls? What do you think the perfumers know about building rock walls? Verse 12 was kind of interesting. Next to them was Shallum, the son of Halahesh, leader of half the district of Jerusalem. He and his daughters made repairs. Isn't that a great one? Get the ladies involved out there. Everybody's involved. We're all building where we're at. Verse 31 and 32 mentions the goldsmiths again. Verse 32, and the merchants were involved. So we could say it like this. There were a lot of people doing things they were not experts at. How many of us have thought we were off the hook because I'm not an expert at teaching 3-year-old kids? I'm not an expert at 5-year-olds. I'm not an expert at 3rd graders, at 12th graders. I'm off the hook. Every job's important, and every effort is necessary. And in this chapter, Nehemiah went around the city wall counterclockwise. And he got clear back to the very beginning. And he tracked the entire progress around from where it started. Because if you look at verse 32, what gate is mentioned in verse 32? Do you see it there? The sheep gate. What verse was mentioned? What gate in verse 1? The sheep gate. It's where it started. And he went counterclockwise around the city. This person and this team were doing this, and this person, this team. He went clear around. So imagine if we went around our facilities and we began to talk about the people that serve. And we began to look at the nursery and we said, you know what? There's people changing diapers while God changes lives in this room. There's people mowing grass so that the testimony of the facility. And there's people cleaning so that a 9-year-old building still looks brand new. And there's people preparing and studying for their children's class that they're going to teach and lead. There's people thinking about signing up for All-Stars to serve with kids this school year on Wednesday nights. There's people thinking about 10:30 Bible hour, coming to that and learning and growing. And there's people thinking about teaching children's classes at 10:30 or at 9 a.m. on Sunday mornings. And we could go up and down the rows at dozens and dozens of servants. And we could tell our own story, just like Nehemiah chapter 3, about people that are willing to serve. I had a conversation with a volunteer a couple weeks ago. They were doing something here, and I said, thank you so much for what you're doing. That's a big help. And they looked right at me. And they're my friend, I thought. And they said, I'm not doing this for you. And the conversation went on, and I was getting ready to go, and I, out of habit, I said, hey, thanks so much, man. This is so great. I'll see you. Hey, I'm doing it for a lot bigger paycheck than that. And I was like, they get it. They're doing it for eternity and for God. If they're doing it for my thank you or my pat on the back, that's pretty short term. That's not going to last. That's not going to sustain. Interesting to note, everybody they needed for the project was already there. God brought and placed in that city everyone they needed for the project. And I love how God brings and places people here in this body for us to see God use us. A couple more things real quick to close. They saw every job is important, but then also they were encouraged to take personal responsibility. Personal responsibility. Verse 10 again. Next to them, Jediah the son of Haramath made repairs in front of his house. Over and over in the chapter, it talks about people that repaired in front of their house. Personal responsibility. This is my issue. This is my problem. It's my wall. I'm not going to sit around and wait for somebody else to come along and fix it. I'm not going to wait for somebody else to build spiritual training into my young person. I'm going to take care of that. Not going to wait for somebody else to fix that or teach that class or fill that void. I'm going to do it. I also like verse 2. And next to Eliashib, the men of Jericho built. Jericho's nowhere near Jerusalem. But they came and they built. And there's a few other references to people that were outsiders that came to build. And then verse 21, I thought this was kind of cool. After him, Meremoth, the son of Urijah, the son of Koz, repaired another section from the door of the house of Eliashib to the end of the house of Eliashib. We've heard Eliashib's name before. What's Eliashib been doing? Where's he working? At the sheep gate with the other priests. So what was going to happen at his house? Somebody took on the responsibility to say, while the priest is over there busy, I'm going to work at his house and get the wall squared away where he's at. And then one guy, verse, 20. After him, Barak, the son of Zabbai, carefully repaired the other section. It's the only time in the book that somebody is, how their work is described. And it's carefully. So again, it's the only time that guy's mentioned in the Bible. But maybe when we get to heaven or something, we'll ask him like, hey, what did you do to get the carefully in there? What did it take to get zealously put next to your name? I mean, what's it take to get God's attention that he puts it in the Bible that you went above and beyond everyone else on the wall building project? What a challenge. Lastly, we want to appreciate the unity because they were building together and they did it with great unity. The cause was more important than personalities. The cause was a bigger deal than their preferences. And they built their unity around theological, meaning they all had the same God. Do you know if we allow something to divide us, we've made that a bigger deal than God? Because God's what unites us. What is it that we have in common? Man, we're so different and we come from different life experiences and different paths that we traveled to get here. But why are we all here? We're all here because we want to know God better. That's what unites us. And so often people will think, well, nobody there likes me. Nobody there's like me. I don't really fit in here. I don't fit. Well, if you think about how different you are than everyone else, then sure, you're not going to fit in. But if you think everybody here has the same goal I do, and that's to know God better, then you're going to think, maybe I do fit in here because we all have the same goal. Second, unity is built around missiological, a big fancy word. That means they all have the same purpose. For them, it was building the wall. For us, it's serving Christ and loving Christ and getting the message of Christ out. And then relational, they all knew and they loved God. Everybody had a part. As you think about our Faith in Action Sunday, that's like a metaphor, a picture of us as a church serving where we all have different roles. We created the Say Yes board in the lobby so that we could all see visible reminders. Wow, there's a spot at the wall that somebody needs to build. Somebody should do something about that spot at the wall. And so there's places at the wall that need help next month. There's places at the wall that need help this fall. Places at the wall. Where's yours? Would you bow your heads with me, please? Heavenly Father, work in every heart here. I pray that every one of us are at our station, our place, the role you've called us to, our part in your story. What an example of all of these different people serving, and some in non-glamorous places, all to advance the cause. And some of us serve in more or less levels of glamour and notice. But it's all for the cause of Christ. All for an eternal investment of our lives and our time. May we be unified around that and lead by example. May we do more together. In Jesus' name, amen.